Your favourite flowers again, sir?
No, only the finest flowers from my favourite flower cellar. Ivy! Where is she? I searched every morning, fearing I'd never see you again.
I thought leaving was the only way to protect you.
She was always the first one on the street, before the bakers had pulled back their shutters, before the milk cart had made its first round, before the lamplighter had finished his last circuit of the night and gone home to sleep. Ivy Marsh was on the corner of Calloway Street with her basket of flowers before any of them. She had been doing it since she was 16, when her mother's hands had gotten bad enough that the early rising was no longer possible, and Ivy had taken the basket and the corner and the cold morning hours and had made them hers. She was 21 now, and she knew every stone of that corner, every variation of the morning light across the seasons, every regular face that passed at every regular hour. She knew the baker's boy who went by at 10 minutes past 5, always in a hurry, never looking at the flowers but sometimes looking at her in a way she did not encourage. She knew the woman from the hat shop 3 streets over, who walked her small dog at 5:30 and always stopped to smell the lavender, even in months when Ivy did not have lavender, as though the smelling were the point and not the lavender itself. She knew the city clerk who went by at 5:45 with the same hat and the same coat and the same expression every single morning, rain or shine or frost, a man so reliable in his habits that she had twice used him to set her watch. She knew the corner the way she knew her mother's face. And then, in October, on a morning when the first cold had come down overnight, and the flowers were breathing small clouds of white into the air, a man she did not know stopped at her basket. He was well dressed, not extravagantly, not a man in a titled coat stepping out of a carriage, but the coat was good, and the boots were good, and the way he stood had the ease of someone for whom ease was the natural condition. He looked at the basket. He said, "What is your best flower this morning?" She said, "The white chrysanthemums. Late in the season, but they came up beautifully this week." He said, "I will take 3. She wrapped them, and he paid, and he left, and she watched him go up Calloway Street in the early morning light and thought that he had good hands, which was not a relevant observation, and went back to her basket. He came back the next morning. He bought 3 white chrysanthemums. He came back the morning after that. He bought whatever she told him was the best flower that morning, which she told him honestly, and not in the way of a seller trying to move the more expensive stock, and he took what she recommended without question, and paid without haggling, and left without lingering, and by the end of the first week, she had stopped being surprised by him and started paying attention. His name, she learned, was not something she learned quickly. He did not offer it, and she did not ask, because the mornings on Calloway Street had their own code, which was that you were present and pleasant, and you did not press for what was not offered, and she had lived by that code for 5 years, and she was not going to violate it for a man with good hands, however early in the morning he arrived. What she learned instead was the other kind of information, the information that a person gave without knowing they were giving it. He arrived at the same time every morning, which was 6 o'clock, which was earlier than most of her customers of his apparent means, and suggested a man who kept early hours by choice rather than necessity. He always looked at everything in the basket before he chose, with a thoroughness that was not the thoroughness of a man who could not make up his mind, but the thoroughness of a man who wanted to make a fully informed decision, even about flowers, even at 6 in the morning. He always said thank you, not as a formality, as a thing he meant, and he always paused, just briefly, just for a moment, before he turned to go, as though he was deciding whether to say something more, and deciding, each time, not to. She noticed the pause. She noticed it every morning, and she said nothing about it, because the code said you did not press, and because she was honestly not certain what she would do if the pause resolved into something. November came, and the chrysanthemums were finished, and she had late roses and anemones, and whatever the flower market down the road had left at the end of the day, which she bought at closing prices and sold fresh the next morning. He came every day. December came, and the flowers were harder to come by and more expensive to buy, and she had to be careful about what she stocked and careful about what she charged, and her margins in December were always thin. He came every day. He started buying more, not extravagantly, not in the way that would have made her uncomfortable, but steadily. 3 stems became 5, 5 became 7, always what she recommended, always at the price she asked, and the price she asked was fair, not inflated for him, fair, because she was not a woman who adjusted her prices for her customers' apparent wealth. She told him this once, on a morning in December, when he had asked for her recommendation, and she had given him the more expensive option, and then, immediately, felt the need to explain that she was not recommending it because of the price. He said, "I know." She said, "I am telling you because some sellers would." He said, "I know that too." She said, "I do not do that." He said, "I know." He said it with a quietness that meant he had already understood this about her and found it unremarkable because it was simply what he expected, and she felt the weight of being expected to be honest as a much more comfortable thing than being expected to perform. She said, "How do you know?" He said, 5 weeks. She said, 5 weeks. He said, "I have been buying flowers from you for 5 weeks, and in 5 weeks, you have told me 3 times that the thing I was looking at was not as good as it appeared, and twice recommended the less expensive option when it was genuinely better, and once told me not to buy anything because nothing in the basket that morning was worth taking." She remembered the last one. It had been a bad morning at the flower market, and she had come to the corner with second-quality stock, and she had told him so, and told him to come back tomorrow, and he had nodded and left, and the next morning he had arrived with the expression of a man who had been looking forward to coming back. She said, "I remember the nothing worth taking morning." He said, "So do I." She said, "Most sellers would not have said that." He said, "I know." He said, "That is the point." He took his flowers and he left, and she watched him go up Calloway Street in the December cold, and she thought that she had been watching him go up Calloway Street for 5 weeks, and she did not know his name, and she was going to have to do something about that at some point. She did something about it in January. She said, on a morning when the frost had come down hard and the flowers were wrapped in extra cloth, and her breath was making shapes in the air between them, she said, "You have been buying flowers from me for 3 months." He said, "Yes." She said, "I do not know your name." He said, "I know." She said, "I would like to know it." He looked at her with the particular attention she had grown accustomed to, the full, unhurried attention that he gave to things he was taking seriously. He said, "My name is Thomas." She said, "Thomas what?" He said, "Vane." She said it back to herself, "Thomas Vane." It did not tell her anything more than his face had told her, and his hands had told her, and 5 weeks of careful observation had told her, which was a considerable amount already. She said, "I am Ivy Marsh." He said, "I know." She said, "How?" He said, "The corner." He said, "The basket has a small mark on the handle, a painted I and M in green." She looked at the basket handle. The letters were faded almost to nothing, painted by her mother years ago. She said, "You noticed that." He said, "The first morning." She said, "And you did not ask." He said, "You would have told me when you wanted to." She looked at him across the flowers in the January cold, and she thought that this was the most accurate assessment of her that a stranger had ever made, which was that she told people things when she was ready and not before, and that pushing her produced nothing and waiting produced everything, and he had known this about her from the first morning without being told. She said, "Thomas Vane." He said, "Yes." She said, "What do you do with the flowers?" He said, "I beg your pardon." She said, "Every morning. You buy flowers and you go up Calloway Street." She said, "I have wondered for 3 months what you do with them." He said, "I take them home." She said, "And?" He said, "There is a room in my house that does not get enough light." He said, "The flowers help." She looked at him. She said, "A room that does not get enough light." He said, "Yes." She said, "That is a very careful answer." He said, "It is an accurate answer." She said, "It is an accurate answer that does not tell me everything." He said, "No." He said, "It does not." She said, "Will you tell me the rest?" He said, "The room belonged to my wife." He said it plainly, the way he said everything, without performing the weight of it, but also without pretending the weight was not there. He said, "She died 2 years ago." He said, "I have not changed the room." He said, "The flowers help it feel less stopped." Ivy stood in the January cold with her basket of flowers, and she felt the weight of what he had said land properly, without softening it for herself. She said, "I am sorry." He said, "Yes." She said, 2 years. He said, "Yes." She said, "And you come here every morning." He said, "I have come here every morning for 3 months." He said, "Before that I came past and did not stop." She said, "Why did you stop in October?" He said, "I do not know." He said, "It was the first cold morning." He said, "You were standing in the cold, and the flowers were making those small clouds of white, and I thought that was the bravest and most ordinary thing, to stand in the cold and sell flowers, and I wanted to buy some." She said, "The bravest and most ordinary thing." He said, "Yes." He said, "Grief makes you notice those things." He said, "The ordinary things that people do in the cold, without complaint." She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "The white chrysanthemums were very good in October." He said, "Yes." He said, "They were." She unwrapped the morning's anemones and held them out to him, the deep purple ones, the best of the batch, and he took them with the hands she had noticed on the first morning, and he paid and he left, and she watched him go up Calloway Street, and she thought that she understood now what the pause was, the brief moment before he turned to go, and she thought that understanding it changed the weight of it considerably. February was cold. It was the kind of February that comes with the intention of lasting beyond its allotted time, grey and hard and relentless, and the flower supply was difficult, and Ivy had days when the basket was thin, and she told him so, and he bought what there was and did not complain. She told him things, in February. She told him about her mother's hands, which had gotten worse in the cold, and the doctor's visits that cost more than a week of flower sales, and the way she had rearranged the accounts to manage it, matter-of-factly. The way she told him about the flower quality, not looking for sympathy, just saying the true thing. He listened the way she had learned he listened, without rushing to fix it or to say the expected comforting things, just present to what she was saying. He told her things too. He told her about the room in February, more than he had told her in January. He told her that his wife had liked flowers particularly and had always had them in the house, and that the room without flowers after she died had been the specific thing he could not make himself look at, which was why he had started buying them and bringing them home. He said, "It is a strange thing to need." She said, "It is not strange at all." He said, "Most people think it is." She said, "Most people think grief should be done at a certain point, and if it is not done, they are uncomfortable." She said, "A man buying flowers for a dead woman's room 2 years on is not strange to me." She said, "It is very ordinary and very human, and I would rather sell flowers for that reason than for half the reasons flowers are bought." He looked at her. He said, "What is the other half?" She said, "People buy flowers to impress other people. People buy flowers to apologize for things they will do again. People buy flowers because they are supposed to, and not because they want to." He said, "And you prefer the ones who want to." She said, "I prefer the ones who mean it." He said, "Yes." He said, "I have noticed that about you." She said, 3 months of observation." He said, 4 months. She said, "You are keeping count." He said, "Yes." She said nothing for a moment, in the February cold with the thin basket between them. She said, "Thomas Vane." He said, "Yes." She said, "I think you should tell me your full name." He was quiet. She said, "You told me Thomas Vane in January." She said, "Thomas Vane is not the whole name. I have been on this corner for 5 years, and I know the names of everyone who matters in this city, and Thomas Vane is not one of them, which means it is not all of it." He looked at her. He said, "You are very observant." She said, "I have been standing on this corner since I was 16. I can tell you the full name and address of every significant family in this city by what they buy and how they walk and what time they leave their houses in the morning." He said, "And what have you observed about me?" She said, "Your coat is from Harwick's on the east side, which is where the better families have their coats made." She said, "Your boots are handmade and have been resold once, which means you have money, but you are not wasteful." She said, "You arrive at 6 o'clock, which means you do not have a household full of obligations at that hour, which means either you live alone or you have a household that is run your way." She said, "You know the flower market's pricing well enough to know when I am charging fairly and when I could charge more, which means you have spent time in markets and not only in drawing rooms." She said, "And you have been buying flowers for a dead woman's room for 4 months, and you have not once talked about it to make yourself look like a good person, which means you are one." He looked at her for a long moment in the February morning. He said, "My full name is Thomas Vane Ashton." She said it back to herself, Thomas Vane Ashton. She knew that name. Everyone in the city knew that name. The Duke of Ashton. She looked at him. He said, "Yes." She said, "You have been buying flowers from me for 4 months." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you are the Duke of Ashton." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you did not tell me." He said, "No." She said, "Why not?" He said, "Because the mornings on Calloway Street were the only part of my day where I was Thomas and not the Duke, and I did not want to lose them." She was quiet. The city was waking up around them. The baker's boy went past in his hurry. The woman from the hat shop came along with her small dog. The clerk, with his identical hat and coat and expression, went by at 6:15 precisely, reliable as a clock. She said, "The only part of your day?" He said, "Yes." She said, "You come here to be ordinary." He said, "I come here for the flowers." She said, "Thomas." He said, "Yes." She said, "Do not be careful with me right now. I am asking you a real question." He said, "Yes." He said, "I come here to be ordinary." He said, "A duke is never ordinary, not in any room he enters, not in any conversation he has, because the title arrives first, and everything else arranges itself around it." He said, "On this corner, you spoke to me for 4 months, as a person and not as a position, and that is," he stopped. He said, "That is the most useful 4 months I have had in 2 years." She said, "And now I know the title." He said, "Yes." She said, "And you are afraid I will speak to the title instead of the person?" He said, "Yes." She looked at the basket. She looked at the anemones, the good ones, the ones she had been saving for him. She said, "Thomas Vane Ashton." She said, "The flowers are 4 pence, same as always." He looked at her. She said, "I am not going to speak to your title." She said, "I did not know it for 4 months, and in 4 months I formed a complete opinion of you, and the opinion was good, and a title does not change an opinion that was formed on better evidence." He said, "Most people." She said, "I am not most people." He said, "No." He said, "I know that." She held out the anemones. He took them. He said, "Ivy Marsh." She said, "Yes." He said, "The pause." He said, "Every morning, when I am about to leave." He said, "I am trying to decide whether to say something." She said, "I know." He said, "You noticed." She said, "First week." He said, "And you said nothing." She said, "I was waiting for you to be ready." He looked at her across the basket in the February cold, in the morning light that was coming up slowly over the rooftops of Calloway Street. He said, "I would like to say something now." She said, "Say it." He said, "I would like to call on you." He said, "Properly." He said, "Not at the corner." He said, "I would like to bring you somewhere and talk without a basket of flowers between us and without 6 o'clock pressing the conversation." She said, "Where?" He said, "Wherever you would like." She said, "Thursday." He said, "Thursday." She said, "There is a tea room on Bernard Street that has good cake and does not require a reservation and does not make a woman feel out of place for being there without a hat that cost more than her week's earnings." He said, "Thursday." He said, "Bernard Street." He said, "What time?" She said, 2 o'clock. He said, 2 o'clock. He left up Calloway Street with the anemones, and she watched him go, and the morning went on around her, and she thought that 4 months of 6 o'clock was a very good foundation, and Thursday was 4 days away, and the anemones had been the best in the basket, and she had saved them for him since before she knew his name and before she knew his title, and that, she thought, was the whole point. Thursday came. She wore the good dress, not extravagantly good, not the kind of good that announced itself, the kind of good that was simply the best she had, which was navy blue and had been her mother's and had been taken in at the waist 3 years ago and was still the best thing she owned. He was at the tea room before her, which she had half expected, because a man who arrived at 6 o'clock on a corner in February was not a man who was late to things. He stood when she came in, which she had not expected, or had expected in the abstract, and found unexpectedly formal in practice, and he said, "Good afternoon," and she said, "Good afternoon," and they sat down. Without the basket between them, and without the morning, and without the cold, it was a different kind of conversation. It was easier, she found. Without the constraint of the corner and the code and the customers going past, they talked the way people talked when they had been building toward a conversation for 4 months and had finally arrived at it. He told her about the estate, which was in the country, 40 miles north, and which he managed from the city for the greater part of the year, and about the work of it, which was the work of a serious man who had taken a serious responsibility and was doing it carefully. She told him about the flower market, the economics of it, the seasonal rhythms, the relationships with the growers she had built over 5 years, the particular satisfaction of a basket that was right, that had exactly what it needed to have, and nothing that was there for show. He said, "You love it." She said, "Yes." She said, "People are surprised by that." He said, "Why?" She said, "Because it is hard and cold, and the margins are thin, and it is not the kind of work that people associate with love." He said, "What do they associate it with?" She said, "Necessity." He said, "And it is not." She said, "It is both." She said, "It is necessary, and I love it, which is the best possible combination." He said, "Yes." He said, "I have found the same about the estate." She said, "You love it." He said, "I love what it could be." He said, "What it is now is the result of years of not enough attention and not enough resource, and I am in the process of making it what it should be, which is slow and expensive and occasionally discouraging." She said, "But you do not stop." He said, "No." She said, "Because you love what it could be." He said, "Yes." She looked at him across the tea table, and she thought that this was the same man who had stood on the corner every morning for 4 months, and said thank you, as though he meant it, and that the title had not changed the man. The title was just a fact about the man, the way her corner was a fact about her, and her basket was a fact about her, and neither of those facts was the whole of her. They stayed for 2 hours. When they left, he walked with her as far as her street, not her door, her street, and at the corner he said, "Ivy Marsh." She said, "Yes." He said, "May I come to the corner tomorrow?" She said, "I will be there at 5 o'clock." He said, "Then I will be there at 5 o'clock." He was. March came. The city moved toward spring, and the flower market opened up, and the basket was full again, and the mornings were easier, and Thomas Vane Ashton was at the corner at 5 o'clock every morning, and sometimes the conversation was long, and sometimes it was short, and sometimes it was only the flowers and the transaction and a look that said more than the conversation, and all of it was good. All of it was the thing she had not expected to find on a corner on Calloway Street at 5 in the morning. She met his man of business, who was not something she had planned. It happened on a morning in March, when a carriage she did not recognize stopped at the corner, and a man got out, middle-aged and dressed in the manner of a professional, and he looked at the corner, and at her, and at the Duke, who was standing at the corner at his usual time, and his expression went through several stages in rapid succession, none of which were comfortable. Thomas said, "Good morning, Weston." The man said, "Your Grace." He said it with the particular flatness of a man who has just understood something he had not understood before and is recalculating several things simultaneously. Thomas said, "Ivy, this is Weston, who manages my affairs in the city." Ivy said, "Good morning." Weston said, "Good morning, miss." He looked at the basket. He looked at Thomas. He looked at the basket again. He said, "Your Grace, when you have a moment." Thomas said, "I will be at the office by 9. Weston said, "Yes." He said, "Of course." He got back into the carriage, and the carriage went up Calloway Street, and Thomas watched it go, and then turned back to the basket. He said, "I apologize for that." She said, "He did not know." He said, "No." She said, "About the corner." He said, "Weston knows I buy flowers." He said, "He did not know from whom." She said, "And now he knows." He said, "Yes." She said, "Is that a problem?" He said, "It is not a problem for me." He said, "Weston is discreet." She said, "Thomas." He said, "Yes." She said, "Am I going to become something the city talks about?" He looked at her. She said, "I am not asking you to tell me it will not happen." She said, "I am asking you to tell me honestly whether you have thought about it." He said, "Yes." He said, "I have thought about it." He said, "My title means that what I do is observed and discussed and formed into opinion, and there is no version of this in which that does not happen." He said, "I will not pretend otherwise." She said, "And?" He said, "And I have decided that the question of what the city says is less important to me than the question of what is true, and what is true is that I have spent 5 months on this corner at 6 o'clock and then 5 o'clock, and I have been more myself here than in any other hour of any other day, and I am not going to give that up, because Weston saw me buying flowers." She said, 5 months at 6 o'clock is not the same as whatever comes next. He said, "No." He said, "But I am hoping whatever comes next includes continued access to the best flowers in the city." She looked at him. She said, "The lily of the valley comes in April." She said, "It is the best thing in the basket in April, and it is not cheap." He said, "Reserve me the best of it." She said, "I will." He left up Calloway Street, and she watched him go, and she thought that 5 months was 5 months, and whatever came next was whatever came next, and she was not afraid of it. Not exactly, but she was a woman who had lived on careful margins for 5 years, and she understood the cost of miscalculation, and she was not going to be careless about this. She was not given the opportunity to be careless. The trouble arrived in April, on a morning when the lily of the valley had just come in, and the basket was the best it had been all year, and she had reserved the finest stems for him, and everything should have been straightforward. The trouble arrived in the form of a woman. She came at 5:15, before Thomas had arrived, and she was beautiful in the way that announced itself, the kind of beautiful that was assembled and maintained with considerable resource and considerable intention, and she was dressed in the manner of a woman who understood that clothes were a statement and had a great deal to say. She looked at the basket. She looked at Ivy. She said, "You are the flower girl." Ivy said, "I sell flowers." The woman said, "Yes." She said, "I know who you are." She said, "My name is Lady Carston." Ivy knew the name. Lady Carston was a widow of 3 years, wealthy, well-connected, and known in the social pages that Ivy read sometimes at the end of the market day when the paper sellers had gone home and left their unsold copies on the corner. Lady Carston said, "I would like to speak with you about the Duke of Ashton." Ivy said, "I sell him flowers." Lady Carston said, "You sell him flowers, and you have tea with him on Bernard Street, and you speak with him every morning for," she paused, "some months now." Ivy said, Yes. Lady Carston said, I want you to understand something, she said. Thomas Ashton is a man of considerable position and considerable responsibility, and the women of his circle have been patient with the morning flower habit because grief is grief and it takes time, she said. But there is a difference between a man in grief buying flowers from a girl on a corner and a man in grief forming an attachment to a girl on a corner, and the city has noticed the difference. Ivy said, I am sure it has. Lady Carston said, what I am telling you is for your benefit as much as his. She said, a man in his position cannot attach himself to a flower seller without consequence to both of them, and the consequence to him is manageable, and the consequence to you is not. She said, when the city decides that a woman of your position has used a grieving man's attachment for her own advancement, the city is not kind about it. Ivy said, I have not used anything. Lady Carston said, the city will not see it that way. She said, the city will see a poor girl who found a rich man in a vulnerable moment and made herself necessary to him, and that is a story the city has told many times, and it does not end well for the girl. Ivy said nothing. Lady Carston said, I am not asking you to disappear. She said, I am telling you that if you care about his reputation and your own, you will consider what you are doing and whether it is wise to continue. She left. Ivy stood at the corner with the lily of the valley in the basket, and she thought about what Lady Carston had said, and she thought about the margin, the careful margin she had been living on for 5 years, and she thought about the cost of miscalculation. Thomas arrived at 5 o'clock. He looked at her face. He said, what happened? She said, nothing. She said, here is the lily of the valley. She said, I reserved the best for you. He took it. He said, Ivy. She said, go. She said, you will be late. He said, I am never late. She said, today you might be. He said, what happened? She said, a woman came. She said, a Lady Carston. She said, she told me certain things about what the city would say. He was very still. She said, she was not entirely wrong. He said, she was entirely wrong. She said, Thomas. He said, what she told you was a description of the city's smallness, not of your situation. He said, she came here to frighten you, and it worked, and I want to know what she said, so I can tell you why each part of it was wrong. She said the city would say, I used a grieving man's attachment for my own advancement. He said, you have spent 5 months telling me when my flowers were not worth buying and charging me exactly what the flowers were worth, and no more. He said, the city would struggle to make that argument to anyone paying attention. She said, the city does not pay close attention to flower girls. He said, then the city is making a significant error. She said, Thomas. She said, I need to think. He said, yes. He said, I will come tomorrow. She said, I know. He said, Ivy. She said, yes. He said, I will come tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, and I am not going to stop coming, because Lady Carston came to the corner with the city's smallness in her mouth and aimed it at you, and I am telling you that plainly, so you know exactly where I stand. She said, I know where you stand. He said, then think. He said, take whatever time you need. He said, I will be at the corner at 5 o'clock. He left. She stood with the lily of the valley, and she thought. She thought for 3 days. On the 3rd day, she did not come to the corner. She had thought about it for 3 days, and she had made a decision, and the decision was the one that cost her something, which was the kind of decision she had learned to trust when it cost her something, because decisions that did not cost you anything were usually the easy ones, and the easy ones were not always the right ones. She did not come to the corner. She sent the basket with the young woman from the flower market, who sometimes helped her on busy days, with a note for Thomas that said she needed time and she would write when she had thought properly. And she went home to her mother, and she sat with her mother, and she told her mother the whole of it for the first time, because she had not told anyone, and she needed to say it out loud to a person who would tell her the truth. Her mother listened. Her mother said, "Do you love him?" Ivy said, "I do not know." Her mother said, "Ivy." Ivy said, "I know him. I know him the way I know the corner, the way I know every stone of it, and every variation of the light, and every regular face. I know him that way." Her mother said, "That is usually what love starts as." Ivy said, "Lady Carston was not wrong about the city." Her mother said, "Lady Carston was entirely right about the city," she said, "and Lady Carston was entirely wrong about you, and the question is not what the city says, but what you want." Ivy said, "What I want might cost him something." Her mother said, "Has he told you he does not want to pay that cost?" Ivy said, "No." Her mother said, "Has he indicated he would rather not pay it?" Ivy said, "No." She said, "He told me where he stood on the corner the morning she came." She said, "He said he was not going to stop coming." Her mother said, "Then the decision you are making is not about him." Ivy said, "No." Her mother said, "It is about whether you believe you are worth the cost." Ivy was quiet. Her mother said, "The corner has been enough for a long time." She said, "It has been enough, and it has been right, and there is nothing wrong with it." She said, "But enough is not the same as all there is." Ivy sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up the basket. She was at the corner at 5 o'clock the next morning. He was already there. He was standing at the corner in the April morning, with no coat, because he had come quickly, without preparation, and she could see from the end of the street that he had been there for some time, that he had arrived early and waited, and was now watching her come up Calloway Street with the basket. She reached the corner. She set the basket down. She said, "I went home to think." He said, "I know." She said, 3 days. He said, "Yes." She said, "I thought about what Lady Carston said, and I thought about the city, and I thought about margins, and the cost of miscalculation." She said, "I have been living on careful margins for a long time, and I know what happens when the calculation goes wrong." He said, "Yes." She said, "And I thought about you." She said, "I thought about 5 months at 6 o'clock, and then 5 o'clock, and a tea room on Bernard Street, and Lily of the Valley, reserved since the beginning of April." He said, "Yes," she said, "and I thought about what my mother asked me, which was whether I believed I was worth the cost." He was very still. She said, "I have decided that I am worth it." She said, "I am telling you that because you deserve to know it, because you have been standing on this corner for 5 months, and you deserve to know that I have decided I am worth the cost of standing here." He said, "Ivy." She said, "Yes." He said, "The cost you are imagining is not the cost I would pay." He said, "What you are imagining as a cost is the city's opinion of something it does not understand, and the city's opinion of things it does not understand is not something I have ever found useful to manage my life by." She said, "It could affect you." He said, "Let me tell you what would actually affect me." He said, What would actually affect me is this corner without you. He said, what would affect me is 5 o'clock without the basket and without the lily of the valley and without the person who tells me when the flowers are not worth buying and charges me exactly what they cost and looks at me like a person and not a position. He said, that is the cost I will not pay. He said, Lady Carston came here because she is a woman who has decided what she wants, and she thought she could remove the obstacle. He said, she is a woman I have known for years, and she has been patient and correct in her patience, because I was not ready for anything for 2 years, and she knew it. He said, and now I am. He said, I am ready, and she came to your corner and tried to frighten you, and I want to tell you, in case it needs saying, that she was right about one thing and wrong about everything else. Ivy said, what was she right about? He said, the city has noticed. He said, yes, the city has noticed that the Duke of Ashton stops at a flower stall on Calloway Street every morning and has been doing so for 5 months. He said, the city has formed opinions, and the opinions are what opinions from a distance always are, which is incomplete and shaped by assumption rather than knowledge. He said, and none of that is the same as what is true. He said, what is true is that I have spent 5 months at this corner, and it has been the most honest 5 months since my wife died, and I am not going to manage my life around the city's assumption when I have the truth in front of me. She said, you have the truth. He said, I have the lily of the valley you reserved since the 1st of April. He said, that is a woman who was thinking about a man before she was ready to tell him she was thinking about him, and a man knows what that means when he sees it. She looked at the lily of the valley in the basket, the finest stems, the ones she had been setting aside every morning for 2 weeks. She said, Thomas Vane Ashton. He said, yes. She said, you are going to have to be patient with me. He said, I have been at this corner at 5 o'clock every morning in all weather for 5 months. She said, that was the beginning of patience. He said, I know. He said, I have a great deal of patience left. She said, good. She handed him the lily of the valley. He took it with those hands, the good hands she had noticed on the first morning in October, and he looked at the flowers, and then he looked at her, and he did not say anything, because the moment did not need words. It needed what it had, which was the morning light on Calloway Street, and the basket between them, and 5 months of every stone of the corner known by heart. She said, 5 pence. He said, that is the price. She said, it is the price. He paid. He said, I will see you tomorrow. She said, 5 o'clock. He said, 5 o'clock. He went up Calloway Street with the lily of the valley, and she watched him go, and the morning went on around her. The baker's boy in his hurry, the woman with the small dog smelling flowers that were not lavender, the clerk with his identical hat, arriving at exactly 5:45 because he was reliable as a clock, all of it ordinary and all of it good, and she stood in the middle of the ordinary good morning, and she thought that she had been right about the decision, that cost you something, that those were the ones to trust, and that this one had cost her 3 days and a basket sent without her, and the bravery of coming back to the corner when she did not have to, and that the return on all of that was considerable, and she was a woman who understood the return on a good investment. The city talked. Of course the city talked. The city talked the way cities talked, about things they did not fully understand, with confidence and incompleteness, and the talking was not always kind and was not always accurate, and was sometimes both of those things at once. Lady Carston was cool when she saw them at the spring concert in May, to which Thomas had brought Ivy, because the spring concert was the kind of event a man brought a person to when he wanted the city to understand something about his intentions, and Ivy had worn the navy dress that had been her mother's and had gone with the particular composure of a woman who has decided she is worth the cost and has found the decision correct. Lady Carston was cool, and Thomas was warm, and the people around them formed their opinions, and Ivy stood in the middle of it and was present to it the way she was present to the corner in the cold, fully and without complaint. The city adjusted. Cities adjusted when they had no choice, and the city had no choice, because the Duke of Ashton was not a man whose habits were altered by opinion, and the flower girl on Calloway Street was not a woman whose composure was affected by being looked at, and the combination of those two things was impervious to the city's adjustments in the opposite direction. By June, the talking had changed character. It had gone from speculation to fact, and the fact was known, and the known fact was that the Duke of Ashton had been buying flowers from Ivy Marsh every morning for 8 months, and had attended 3 public events with her in May and June, and had introduced her to his man of business, and to his estate manager, and to 2 of his closest friends, and that Ivy Marsh was a woman who looked at people directly and said what she meant, and had the respect of everyone on Calloway Street, from the baker's boy to the clerk with the reliable hat. The corner knew first. The corner knew in September, when Thomas arrived at 5 o'clock on a morning that felt different from the other mornings, in the same way that October had felt different from September. The air changed, and the light changed, and something in the world shifted by one increment. He said, "Good morning." She said, "Good morning." He looked at the basket. He said, "What is your best flower this morning?" She said, "The late roses. They came up beautifully this week." He said, "I will take them." She reached into the basket for the late roses, and she looked up, and he was not looking at the basket. He was looking at her. She said, "Thomas." He said, "Ivy Marsh." She said, "Yes." He said, "I have a question for you." She said, "Ask it." He said, "I have been coming to this corner for a year, and in that year you have told me the truth about the flowers, and charged me what they were worth, and thought about me before you were ready to tell me you were thinking about me, and you came back to this corner when you did not have to, and you stood in the cities looking, and were not diminished by it." He said, "I would like to know if you would be willing to stand with me for considerably longer than a year." She said, "How much longer?" He said, "I was thinking permanently." She said, "Permanently?" He said, "Yes." She said, "Thomas Vane Ashton, that is not the way a man asks a question like that." He said, "You are right." He said, "You are entirely right." He did something then that was not something that happened on the corners of city streets at 5 o'clock in the morning. He took her hand, the flower-dusty hand, the hand that had been working the basket since she was 16, and he held it. He said, "Ivy Marsh." He said, "Will you marry me?" He said it simply and completely, the way he had said everything for a year, without performance and without apology, just the true thing offered plainly. She looked at him in the September morning, the light coming up over the rooftops of Calloway Street, the city waking around them, the baker's boy going past in his hurry. She said, "Yes." She said it the same way, simply and completely, and without performance and without apology. Just yes. He held the hand that had been working the basket since she was 16, and she held the late roses, and the morning was ordinary and extraordinary, and both of those things at once, the same as it had always been, the same as it would always be, the ordinary good morning that was the best possible kind of morning, the kind you came back to every day, because every day it was worth coming back to. The corner was on Calloway Street for years after, not because it had to be, not because the margins required it, but because Ivy Marsh understood that a thing you loved was a thing you kept, not as a relic, not as a gesture, but as the living version of itself, present and working and real. She went to the corner on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She had help now for the other days, the young woman from the flower market who had delivered the basket that one morning in April, and who turned out to be very good at the work, and very good at the code of the corner, which was to be present and pleasant, and not to press for what was not offered. On Tuesday and Thursday mornings, Ivy Marsh was at the corner before the city was awake, with the basket and the linen cover, and the flowers that were the best she could find, and she sold them to the people who came, and told them honestly what was worth buying, and charged them fairly, and said good morning, and meant it. And at 5 o'clock on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, Thomas Vane Ashton was at the corner. He always looked at everything in the basket before he chose. He always said thank you. He always paid exactly what she asked. And he never paused before he turned to go. He had no reason to pause any more. He had said the thing, and she had said yes, and the mornings were the mornings, and the corner was the corner, and all of it was enough. All of it was the whole thing. Thank you for listening to this story, all the way to the end. Please tell us which city you are watching from, and what the story made you feel. Do not forget to subscribe, so you will not miss the next one.